to identify security flaws. He and his friend Lenny DeChico remotely infiltrated DEC to steal the prized source code. But then Lenny betrayed him. When Lenny refused to fork over $150 after losing a bet, Kevin started calling Lenny's employer, pretending to be the IRS, and claiming Lenny was wanted for tax crimes. Lenny was so angry that he told his boss that he and Kevin were hacking into DEC late at night from the office. The FBI got involved, and Lenny started secretly recording his conversations with Kevin. When the feds arrested Kevin, Kevin said Lenny was dancing in a little circle of joy, as if he were celebrating some kind of victory over me. This hack would haunt him. Prosecutor Leon Weidman painted Kevin as a significant threat, claiming he can whistle into a telephone and launch a nuclear missile from NORAD. That might seem ridiculous now, but in the 1980s, there was a lot of fear over how technology worked. Computers and the fledgling internet were not that well understood by the general public. So the judge threw Kevin into solitary confinement, where he spent 8 months. When he was ready for release, Bonnie left him. He suspected she was cheating. After hacking into her answering machine, he discovered that she was having an affair with his best friend, Louis. Despite the betrayal, he remained friends with Louis, because there were very few people who could understand his predicament. After serving a year in prison, Kevin knew he had to tread more carefully. He needed to ensure his phone couldn't be tracked. He had to find a way of changing the electronic serial number of his Novatel PTR 825. He called Novatel and posed as one of their engineers, even calling from the noisy Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas to sound credible. He spoke with an engineering manager named Kumamoto, who revealed it was possible to change the ESN from the phone's keypad if you had a special computer chip containing a special version of the firmware. Kevin convinced Kumamoto to ship a few chips to the Las Vegas hotel where he claimed to be staying. He then called up an electronics store and obtained the ESNs of recently activated phones, allowing him to impersonate those devices on the network. Around this time, Kevin was introduced to a supposed star hacker named Eric through his half-brother's ex-girlfriend. Eric was super secretive. He wouldn't give Kevin his phone number or pager number. They communicated through an intermediary. After talking a few times, Kevin's gut told him something was off. Eric didn't talk like other hackers. He sounded more like Joe Friday, like a cop. He asked questions like, "What projects have you been up to lately? Who are you talking with these days?" He decided to dig deeper into Eric's background. Kevin's friend Dave at Pacific Bell set up a trap with a bait phone number. When Eric dialed in, the call rerouted to Dave's office, allowing them to capture Eric's phone number through the system's caller ID. Using Eric's phone number, he discovered his address. He called Pacific Bell, pretending to be a technician named Terry. When asked for a tech code, Kevin provided a random number. He recalled, "I knew she wasn't going to look it up. They never did. Any 3-digit number would satisfy, so long as I sounded confident and didn't hesitate." Upon requesting the address linked to Eric's phone number, the employee didn't bat an eye. 3636 South Sepulveda, Unit 107B, registered under the name Joseph Wernham. Kevin's doubts deepened when he accessed Eric's call logs and found calls to the Los Angeles headquarters of the FBI. Driven to unravel the full story, Kevin devised an elaborate scheme to obtain Eric's social security number. He posed as a member of the Office of the Inspector General at the Social Security Administration, responsible for investigating fraud. To gain credibility, he meticulously researched the agency's internal structure, the names of supervisors and managers, and even learned the company lingo, including terms like mods, short for modules, referring to teams handling claims. A staff member named Ann ate up his vibes and gave him anything he wanted. Social security numbers, birth dates, benefits, earnings. Ann's information about an Eric Hines Sr., likely Eric's father, led to a shocking discovery. When Kevin called Eric Hines Sr. and said, "I'm trying to get a hold of Eric. I'm a friend of his from high school," Eric Hines Sr. sounded annoyed and replied, "My son died as an infant." Who really was the person masquerading as Eric Hines Jr.? Kevin remembered Eric bragging about collaborating with hacker Kevin Poulsen. He dug around and found an article about Poulsen conspiring with 2 others to rig radio content. He recognized the name of one of the co-conspirators, but wasn't familiar with the other, Justin Tanner Peterson. When he manipulated the Department of Motor Vehicles to read in Peterson's physical description, it was a match for Eric. Justin Tanner Peterson was a hacker working as an FBI informant to save his own ass, in Kevin's words. The identity Joseph Ornell listed on the apartment was the made-up identity of an FBI agent named Joseph Waves. Meanwhile, security at Pacific Bell had begun wiretapping calls from his father's house. In a lapse of judgment, Kevin had used his dad's landline while staying there temporarily instead of his untraceable cell phone. As the FBI pursued Kevin, he was also pursuing them. He figured out the names and numbers of the FBI agents Eric was talking to, and upon learning that the agents used the cell provider Pactel in Los Angeles, Kevin infiltrated Pactel's system to track their call records and pinpoint their locations. He also installed a scanner in his office at the private investigation firm where he worked to detect FBI cell phones, using software programmed with numbers linked to Eric. In September 1992, Kevin's scanner detected the cell phone of FBI Special Agent Ken McGuire. He quickly cleaned up his apartment, ensuring there wasn't any evidence. On the morning of September 30, 1992, police knocked on his door, and he answered.
Understandable if you're a little tired, but the trial yet continues. Guilt weighs you down.
Naked. The agents were also not pleased to find a box of FBI donuts waiting for them. Although the FBI found no evidence, his close calls with authorities were escalating. When Kevin conned the Department of Motor Vehicles into handing him a copy of Eric Hines' driver's license, DMV investigators tracked him to a print shop where Kevin's grandmother had driven him. The investigators chased him through the shop where he barely escaped. All the while, his poor grandmother waited in the parking lot for 3 hours, wondering what had happened to her grandson. Kevin later reflected, "I never felt guilty about getting information I wasn't supposed to have. But when I thought about my grandmother, who had done so much for me and cared so much for me all my life, sitting there in her car for so long, waiting and anxious, I was filled with remorse." It was hard to leave his beloved grandma and mom, but he knew he had to go on the run. A warrant was out for his arrest for violating his probation by hacking and associating with other hackers. Kevin adopted a new identity, Eric Weiss, the real name of his hero, the magician Harry Houdini. He planned to do his own disappearing act. To solidify his persona, he infiltrated a credit reporting agency to find an Eric Weiss with good credit and around his age. Then he got help from Ann, his friendly contact at the Social Security Administration, to gather other personal details about Eric. He moved to Denver with his new identity, drawn by the allure of its natural beauty, and got a gig in the IT department of a prominent law firm, where he worked by day and hacked by night. The fun lay in hacking the world's largest tech companies with presumably the best security. He set his sights on obtaining the source code for one of Motorola's coolest phones, the MicroTac Ultra Light. He wanted to understand how the phone software worked to try to change the ESN, just as he had done with his Novotel phone. Posing as Rick from Motorola's research and development team in Illinois, he got Alyssa on the phone, a stand-in for Pam, an assistant to a VP in R&D who was on vacation. He deceived Alyssa by saying that Pam was supposed to send him the source code for the MicroTac Ultralight, but had directed him to Alyssa if she couldn't send it before her holiday. When Alyssa asked, "What version do you want?" Kevin had no clue what to ask for and said, "How about the latest and greatest?" Just like that, Alyssa handed him one of Motorola's most protected trade secrets. Though there was one little hiccup. Kevin had forgotten to acquire the compiler to translate the source code into machine-readable code. Still, it was a thrill. Next came Nokia. He posed as an engineer from Nokia USA in San Diego and contacted one of Nokia's offices in Finland, where a guy named Tapio transferred the source code for the Nokia 121 via FTP. Surprised by how easy that was, Kevin wondered if he could infiltrate Nokia's internal network to access more source codes and information on upcoming releases. He deceived Nokia England's IT department into giving him the login details to connect to his operating system, which he exploited to gain full system access and create a new user account for himself. Then he set his sights on a secretive digital phone under development, internally called the HD760. He contacted the lead developer, Marku, persuading him to share the latest source code. However, Nokia blocked outbound file transfers for security reasons, following alerts triggered when Kevin created his new account. Unfazed, he persuaded Marku to ship the source code via a tape drive to a Nokia office in Florida. His friend Lewis would impersonate the senior vice president of Nokia USA to retrieve the tape, as it was too risky for Kevin to go. The package was arranged to be picked up at a Ramada Inn near the Nokia office, but the FBI had already been alerted. Kevin became suspicious when he called the hotel to confirm the pickup, and the receptionist seemed nervous and put him on hold for several minutes. Kevin called back later, pretending to be an FBI agent. "This is Special Agent Wilson with the FBI. Are you familiar with the situation on your premises?" The manager responded, "Of course I am. The police had the whole place under surveillance. It was time to leave and become someone else. He settled on Seattle because of its tech scene, Thai food, and good coffee. He adopted the identity of a baby who died, Brian Merrill, which he obtained by posing as a private investigator at South Dakota's State Registrar for Vital Statistics. He had to be extremely careful about hiding his real identity. The front page of the New York Times labeled him cyberspace's most wanted. Kevin felt journalist John Markoff had wrongly turned him into a supervillain. The article was right about one thing. Kevin was eluding the FBI. Special Agent Kathleen Carson confirmed as much in a letter to a British computer expert Kevin had been in contact with. The letter read, in part, "I do not believe we will ever be able to find him via his telephone traces, telnet, or FTP connections. Your assistance is crucial to this investigation." The crucial assistance the FBI received actually came from Tsutomu Shinamura, known as Shimmy, one of America's most skilled computer security experts. Shimmy joined the FBI manhunt because he was furious that Kevin had hacked into his system. At the time, Shimmy and hacker Mark Latour were working on a special project involving the OK900 cell phone. They had reverse engineered it, allowing them to change the ESN via the keypad. Eager to learn more, Kevin hacked into Shimmy's server and managed to steal files from his home computer. Shimmy was furious when he discovered the intrusion using network monitoring tools. Kevin wrote in his memoirs, "I had unleashed a hacker vigilante who would stop at nothing to get even with me." The high of hacking into Shimmy's server was short-lived. Police, armed with a search warrant, entered Kevin's home when he wasn't there and seized his electronics. They were not the FBI, but local cops who were looking into his alias, Brian Merrill. Still, it was only a matter of time before the different agencies talked. He fled Seattle for yet another fresh start, relocating to Raleigh, North Carolina. He was now Michael David Stanfill, an identity he acquired after infiltrating the admissions office of Portland State University and accessing more than 13,000 student records. Remember when he hacked into Motorola and obtained the source code without securing the needed compiler? He now manipulated an engineer named Marty from Motorola's compiler supplier to FTP the files with him. Marty mentioned that the FBI was tracking a super hacker that they figured would try to acquire the compiler. Little did he know he was talking to that very super hacker. From this latest stunt, Kevin woke up one day to find his cell phone dead. His service provider disconnected it because the real Michael Stanfill had reported identity theft. The ruse unraveled when Kevin attempted to avoid paying a $400 deposit for new electricity customers by requesting a reference letter from Michael's utility company. Unfortunately for him, the letter was also faxed to the real Michael's address, exposing the fraud. With his deception discovered, Kevin chose another alias from the thousands he accessed from Portland State University, G. Thomas Case. The feds were closing in on him, and they were about to get a lucky break. Kevin had stored the files he grabbed from Shimmy's server on a community forum called The Well. However, The Well had an automated alert system that notified users when they used a significant amount of disk space. One day, Bruce Cobold received an email indicating that his account for an event he was organizing was using 150 megabytes of storage on The Well servers, which was a substantial amount at the time. Bruce discovered that the stored files didn't belong to him. They contained emails addressed to Titomu's work email. They were the stash of files stolen from Shimmy's computer. When Kevin tried to figure out how much the feds knew about him by hacking into journalist John Markoff's emails, Shimmy was watching his every move. Internet service providers granted Shimmy full access to their networks. By cross-referencing instances of unauthorized access to the well with the login and logout records from the internet service provider Netcom, Shimmy found a pattern. One account accessed the well through Netcom's dial-up modems in Denver and Raleigh. Shimmy's team traced the call in real time to Sprint's cellular network. However, Kevin had manipulated the system to use a phone number that wasn't assigned to any customer but still appeared to be legitimate. So, a Sprint engineer cleverly focused on calls placed to the manipulated number rather than from it, leading to a Raleigh area code. These connection attempts consistently utilized the same cell phone tower, indicating that the phone Kevin used to connect to the internet was in a fixed location. Shimmy hopped on a plane to Raleigh. Kevin's attempt to connect to Netcom through a different cell phone provider as a precaution was in vain. All cell phone companies were on the alert for any strange activity, immediately relaying it to Shimmy. When a suspicious data call was underway, Shimmy and his team jumped into a vehicle and used a radio direction finding device to try to pinpoint the source of the cellular radio signal, leading them to Kevin's neighborhood. When they intercepted a conversation between Kevin and another hacker, journalist John Markoff, who joined the pursuit, recognized his voice and shouted, "It's him. It's Mitnick." After finishing up at the gym, Kevin went home and logged onto his computer a little after midnight on February 15, 1995. He noticed several of the back doors he had been using to access various systems had unexpectedly vanished. He had a sinking feeling in his stomach that something bad was about to happen. So he looked out into his apartment corridor, which gave a view of the parking lot, to see if he was being watched. A U.S. Marshal caught a glimpse of him. At 1:30 a.m., Kevin got a knock on the door. "Who is it?" he yelled. "FBI." After nearly 3 years of hiding, they finally caught him. When Kevin passed Shimmy in court, he said, "I respect your skills," and nodded. Shimmy returned the nod. Kevin was tossed into solitary confinement, his greatest fear. He tried to get out on bail, but the judge denied him a bail hearing. At first, he and his lawyer weren't allowed to examine the electronic evidence against him, as the judge feared he'd unleash a destructive computer virus. Due to the harshness of how he was being treated, the community of supporters banded together and started the Free Kevin movement. When Kevin saw the outpouring of support, it moved him. It meant the world to me that there was an army of people working tirelessly to support me. It gave me more hope and courage than they could ever know. Prosecutors alleged that he caused $300 million in damages based on the value of the source code, which included development costs. Kevin thought that was ridiculous and likened it to nabbing someone for stealing a can of Coke and demanding that he repay the cost of developing Coca-Cola's secret formula. He argued the damages should reflect the value of the source code license, which he estimated to be under $10,000. Ultimately, he was ordered to pay $4,125, factoring in his ability to pay. He wasn't exactly wealthy. He had never used or sold any of the information he accessed. Kevin pleaded guilty to 7 counts, including wire fraud, computer fraud, possession of access devices, and interception of data communications. He served 5 years in prison. When he was released on January 21st, 2000, he said, "My case is a case of curiosity."
Mr. Mitnick, thank you for being with us here today.
After his release, his former adversary, the U.S. government, invited him to share his insights.
The human side of computer security is easily exploited and constantly overlooked. Companies spend millions of dollars on firewalls, encryption, and secure access devices, and it's money wasted because none of these measures address the weakest link in the security chain: the people who use, administer, operate, and account for computer systems that contain protected information.
Kevin became hugely sought after.
Now, Kevin Mitnick is the world's most famous hacker.
Kevin Mitnick is a security consultant and CEO of Mitnick Security.
He used his hacking skills ethically by advising companies on strengthening their security and also shared helpful everyday advice.
0000000. And voila, stay safe. Don't trust the safes.
Kevin had created a new life for himself and found love again, marrying Kimberly, whom he met at a cybersecurity conference in Singapore. But his happiness would be cut short. In 2022, Kevin received the devastating news that he had pancreatic cancer, which he battled for 14 months. On July 16, 2023, Kevin Mitnick died peacefully. He was 59 years old. At the time of his passing, his wife was pregnant. Kimberly later expressed, "Our son will know you, and I am convinced he will be a mini you." Kevin Mitnick went from being the world's most wanted hacker to the world's most wanted security expert. His insights have changed how companies and individuals protect their most sensitive data. As Kevin reflected on his remarkable journey, he said it was just like magic. While Kevin never used any of the information he accessed, the reality is not everyone out there would do the same. In 2023, Americans lost $10 billion to fraud, with imposter scams topping the list according to the FTC. And if you've ever Googled your name or email, as I have, you'll be shocked to see just how much information is out there about you. And unfortunately, data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, or anyone looking to exploit you. And that's why I'm really excited to be partnering with Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura is on a mission to protect you online. Aura shows you which data brokers are selling your information and automatically submits opt-out requests for you. This doesn't just cut down on spam, but protects you from hackers trying to access your social media, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Beyond safeguarding your information from data brokers, Aura includes a credit monitoring service where you can monitor your credit and get fraud alerts, as well as a password manager, antivirus protection, and a VPN, all without having to download several different apps. It's the best of everything at an affordable price. Aura is free for you to try out for 2 weeks by signing up at my custom link, aura.com/newsthink. That's aura.com/newsthink. The link is in my description. Thanks for watching. For Newsthink, I'm Cindy Paul. Friday, September 21, 2001 began like any other day for Ana Montez. She got into a Toyota and made the usual 25-minute drive to the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's top spy agency, where she served as a lead analyst on Cuba. But this was no ordinary day. What she didn't realize was that undercover FBI agents were following her. The U.S. government had finally uncovered the truth after 17 years. Ana Montez, the woman shaping intelligence on Cuba, had been secretly working for them all along. This is the story of the damage she did and how the most dangerous female spy was finally brought down. Ana Montez was born on February 28, 1957 in Nuremberg, West Germany, where her Puerto Rican father, Alberto, served as an army doctor stationed at the Grafenwöhr Army Base. The family moved to Topeka, Kansas the following year after Dr. Montez was accepted into the Menninger School of Psychiatry, then one of the top psychiatric programs in the country. Dr. Menninger preached the value of a loving family, that Alberto ruled his own with fear. One of the earliest signs of his cruelty was when Anna developed asthma as a child.
Instead of treating her and giving her help that she needed to breathe, sat her down and watched his daughter gasping for breath and tried to treat it as a psychiatrist would, not as a medical doctor.
Investigative journalist Jim Hopkins spent 15 years uncovering the story of Anna Montez, detailed in his book, codenamed Blue Red.
Her father, he started using the belt to discipline the kids as early as age 5.
When Anna was 15, her parents divorced. Her mother, Amelia, began asserting her independence and became increasingly outspoken, especially in her opposition to U.S. funding for the Contras, who were fighting the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Anna later said she had spied to stand up for the oppressed. While at university, she spent her junior year abroad in Madrid during a historic upheaval. The death of dictator Francisco Franco marked the end of nearly 4 decades of authoritarian rule, ushering in a wave of democratic reform. The streets filled with protests, many targeting the United States, which had supported Franco's regime. In the Spanish capital, Anna fell in love with Ricardo Fernandez Iriart, a left-leaning Argentinian living in political exile. Their long conversations of American imperialism shaped her belief that the U.S. acted as a global vote. After graduating, she took a clerk typist job at the Department of Justice in December 1979, and at the same time enrolled in a master's at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, where she specialized in Latin American affairs. At SAIS, Anna befriended Marta Velázquez, a fellow Puerto Rican who was secretly scouting sympathetic students as potential recruits for Cuban intelligence. When Marta asked Anna if she'd be willing to help the Sandinistas by translating Spanish articles, Anna sensed it was a cover for something more and said yes, reflecting, "I hadn't thought about actually doing anything until I was propositioned. Once offered the opportunity to help illegally, it would be more than I could do legally." In March 1985, she and Velázquez traveled secretly to Havana using fake passports, where Cuba's intelligence service, the DGI, trained her in the basics of spycraft. She learned how to lose a tail, how to communicate in code, and how to beat a polygraph. One trick involves clenching your anal sphincter while telling the truth and relaxing it when lying, an odd but effective way to control physiological signals. The Cubans wanted Anna to infiltrate the U.S. intelligence community and urged her to apply for a job in the Defense Intelligence Agency. In September 1985, Anna Montez joined the DIA as an entry-level analyst. She falsely claimed she graduated from Johns Hopkins when in reality she never completed her degree, and denied ever using drugs despite doing cocaine while working at the DOJ and attending grad school. The DIA didn't administer a polygraph. It was scrambling to fill positions amid the Reagan administration's push to expand intelligence operations in Latin America. The same year she joined the DIA, Anna's younger sister also began a career in government. Lucy Montez joined the FBI's Miami office as a Spanish-language translator, working on wiretap translations for organized crime and drug investigation. Their brother, Tito, also became an FBI special agent, but her family would never suspect a thing. 4 months after starting at the DIA, Montez was granted authorized access to highly sensitive, classified information related to national security. Montez memorized everything she read, so she never removed a single document from work.
And I was able to go through her bookcase, and one of the books that I found was a memory training book, and it was underlined and highlighted. So clearly she was trying to improve her memory.
Each night, she went home and typed up the classified information on her Toshiba laptop, and then transferred it onto encrypted floppy disks. The Cubans would communicate with her through shortwave radio broadcasts. For example, every Saturday at 9, Montez tuned in to a certain frequency where a woman's voice would call out,
Atención, atención.
followed by a string of numbers.
701-346-2859.
She jotted down the numbers on water-soluble paper, then used a decryption program stored on a floppy disk, along with a cheat sheet, to turn the digits into messages from her Cuban handlers. After receiving her instructions, she'd meet her handler at a DC restaurant and pass the discs between bites of Chinese food. While secretly feeding intelligence to the Cubans, she was rising fast at the DIA, becoming the principal analyst for Nicaragua and El Salvador, 2 Cold War hotspots. In 1987, she visited a U.S.-backed military base in El Salvador, where she was briefed on sensitive operations and security. Details that would have been a gold mine for America's enemies. Just weeks after her visit, rebels ambushed the base, killing 42 Salvadorian soldiers and a U.S. military advisor, 27-year-old Staff Sergeant Gregory Fronius, a Green Beret. The FBI pressed her about that trip years later, but she was never charged. During a routine background check in 1991, Montez admitted to lying about her past drug use and falsely claimed to have completed her master's degree. Instead of facing consequences, an adjudicator let it slide, thinking she had learned her lesson and this happened years ago. When she finally took her first polygraph in 1994, she passed. Investigators later came to believe she used the same muscle control trick she'd learned in Havana. By the time of her polygraph, she had become the DIA's lead analyst on Cuba, her dream job, a role that gave her direct access to the secrets Havana cared most about. Montez exposed the identity of a covert American officer en route to Cuba, allowing Cuban agents to intercept him. The Cubans let Montez know, "We were waiting here for him with open arms." Montez later admitted to exposing 4 American intelligence officers working undercover in the island nation. For nearly a decade, no one had any idea what she was really up to, until an incident in 1996. On February 24, 1996, Cuban MiG-29 jets shot down 2 unarmed civilian planes flown by the exile group Brothers to the Rescue. The group had provoked the regime by dropping anti-Castro leaflets over Havana. 3 Americans and a U.S. resident were killed. Montez was quickly summoned to the Pentagon to brief the Joint Chiefs of Staff on Cuba's military capabilities. This was supposed to be the defining moment of her career, and yet she decided to leave work early. According to a coworker, Montez should have worked until 10 p.m., but received a phone call, became visibly agitated, and left early at 8 p.m. Montez met with her Cuban handler multiple times that week. The Cubans were desperate to know if the U.S. was preparing to retaliate. A counterintelligence analyst at the DIA grew suspicious of her and tipped off Scott Carmichael, a former police officer turned DIA spy hunter, who brought Montez in for what she believed was routine questioning. When Carmichael accused her of being a spy, she didn't deny it. Carmichael described to Jim Popkin how, that entire time, she was just scared to death and just staring at me. And I mean, I felt like she was staring at my lips to catch every word. She insisted no one called her at the Pentagon and that she left early because she was tired and hungry. Her answers didn't sit right with Carmichael, but he didn't have enough proof. The case was quietly closed and her espionage continued. In 1997, Montez is believed to have exposed a top-secret, multi-billion-dollar U.S. satellite program called MISTY. MISTY appeared to be a regular communication satellite to America's enemies, rather than what it actually was, a satellite designed to capture high-resolution images from space. She also tipped off the Cubans about an FBI surveillance van with a slightly raised roof concealing hidden antennas that was eavesdropping near Cuba's de facto embassy in Washington. As she impressed her bosses in Havana, she was also winning over her superiors in Washington, racking up accolades for her intelligence, expertise, and work ethic. She became known as the Queen of Cuba, but even Cubans ruled forever. By 1998, the cracks in Ana Montez's double life were beginning to show, ironically because of her sister. By coincidence, Lucy was assigned to the FBI unit in Miami that helped take down a major Cuban spy ring known as the WASP network. The amount of information the FBI seized from floppy disks and intercepted radio messages filled 1,400 pages. Montez's handler abruptly cut off contact. The regime couldn't take the risk. From now on, meetings would be overseas, usually in the Caribbean. The silence devastated her. Montez had no friends, no one to confide in. 2 of her siblings worked for the FBI.
She started showering excessively, eating only boiled potatoes, wearing gloves when she drove. A lot of OCD odd behavior, and because of all the pressure that ironically her sister had helped to contribute to with the arrest in Miami.
As Montez spiraled under pressure, a determined government employee was carefully connecting the dots. Known in codename Blue Wren as Elena Valdez, not her real name, she was an analyst at the NSA who had become convinced that a Cuban spy was operating deep inside the U.S. government. Her suspicions were based on intercepted communications and intel from the Miami arrest. Valdez had fled Castro's Cuba as a child with her family.
So this was personal to her. She was a dog with a bone, and she needed to solve this.
The NSA had a profile of them all. The suspect was someone who had purchased a Toshiba laptop to communicate with the Cubans, visited the U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay in July 1996, had access to something labeled safe, and met with someone important with the initials WD. Valdez shared her leads with the FBI, and Special Agent Steve McCoy was assigned to the case. He investigated for 2 years, but made little progress. Valdez became frustrated because she didn't think the FBI was taking the case seriously. So she went over the FBI's head and brought the case to the DIA.
She was threatened with being fired. She was threatened with being jailed for essentially doing her job and trying to find a spy.
When Valdez mentioned to the DIA that the Cubans had repeatedly referenced the word safe, Chris Simmons, a veteran DIA Cuba analyst, realized safe wasn't a physical safe. It was the DIA's internal communication system. Simmons passed the lead to Scott Carmichael, the DIA investigator who runs Pastor Montez. He and his partner began digging into one clue in particular. The suspect had visited Guantanamo Bay in July 1996. A search of internal travel records pulled up about 100 names, and one of them was Ana Montez. When the DIA alerted the FBI, Agent McCoy brushed off their suspicions, saying, "I've got no reason to believe that the person I'm looking for is a female." The idea of a woman being the mole simply wasn't on their radar. But Carmichael connected one other detail in the mole's profile, the initials WD. He remembered Montez had boasted about working with William Doherty, the FBI's chief of counterintelligence. The FBI finally opened an investigation into Montez, codenamed Blue Red. Agents began quietly tailing her, catching her using payphones to dial Cuban pagers. Around the same time, Montez considered walking away from her life as a Cuban spy. She wanted to build a life with Roger Corneretto, a Pentagon official who ran a Cuban intelligence program at U.S. Southern Command, a major military installation in Florida. But Cuba refused to let her go. Montez was devastated. "I'm a human being with needs that I couldn't deny. I thought the Cubans would understand." Her romantic relationship didn't survive. The FBI got a major break when Agent Peter Lapp obtained a subpoena for Montez's credit records. He spotted a line of credit from a CompUSA computer store in Alexandria, Virginia. He and Special Agent McCoy began pulling old paper sales records from computer stores across the D.C. area and discovered Montez had purchased a Toshiba laptop, just like the one the mole was believed to be using. On May 25, 2001, the FBI broke into her apartment when she was out of town. They found the Toshiba laptop, and when they copied the hard drive, they discovered messages between Montez and her Cuban handler, including evidence that she had exposed the true identity of a U.S. intelligence officer undercover in Cuba. The FBI had enough to arrest her, but they wanted more proof. They wanted the floppy disks Montez used to decrypt Havana's radio broadcasts, which they couldn't find in her apartment. So they hatched a plan to get her hands on the one thing she always wanted, her purse. As detailed in codename Blue Red, on August 16, 2001, the DIA staged a last-minute intelligence briefing just one floor from Montez's desk, close enough that she might leave her purse behind. And sure enough, she did. To get the analyst who sat next to Montez away from his desk, he was told someone had hid his van in the parking lot and driven off. Then, FBI Agent McCoy, posing as an IT technician, entered Montez's cubicle and grabbed her purse. They didn't find the floppy disks, but they did find more damning evidence inside. Prepaid calling cards used at payphones, a New York pager number linked to Cuban intelligence, and handwritten numeric codes used to send messages to a handler's country. In the days after 9/11, the DIA feared Montez might leak sensitive military information to Cuba, so they wanted her arrested as soon as possible. Friday, September 21, 2001 seemed like any other day for Ana Montez. She got into her car and drove her usual route to work, unaware that FBI agents were tailing her. When she arrived, Montez received a call regarding a supposed time card issue involving one of her employees and was asked to resolve it with the Inspector General's office. But the meeting was a trap. Waiting for her inside the conference room were FBI Special Agents Steve McCoy and Peter Lapp. When they handcuffed her, she barely reacted. Lapp later said, "We figured she would just kind of collapse, be a wreck. She walked out that calm. I won't say proud, but with that kind of composure." Ana Montez's family sold off assets to help pay for her legal defense, hiring Plato Caceres, one of Washington's most renowned attorneys. Caceres had represented two of the most infamous double agents, Robert Hansen, who spied from inside the FBI, and Aldrich Ames, who sold secrets while working at the CIA. I made videos of them linked in my description. Hansen and Ames were driven by greed, but Ana Montez didn't spy for money. On October 16, 2002, she stood before a judge and explained why she betrayed her country. An Italian proverb perhaps best describes the fundamental truth I believe in. All the world is one country. It is a principle that, tragically, I believe we have never applied to Cuba. Your Honor, I engaged in the activity that brought me before you because I obeyed my conscience rather than the law. I believe our government's policy towards Cuba is cruel and unfair, profoundly unneighborly, and I felt morally obligated to help the island defend itself from our efforts to impose our values and our political system on it. My way of responding to our Cuban policy may have been morally wrong. Perhaps Cuba's right to exist free of political and economic coercion did not justify giving the island classified information to help it defend itself. I can only say that I did what I thought right to counter a grave injustice. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and was sentenced to 25 years behind bars. But instead of the low-security facility her defense and the judge requested, Montez was sent to a high-security wing of Federal Medical Center Carlswell in Texas, home to violent female inmates, including an Al-Qaeda operative and a woman who murdered a pregnant woman who stole her baby. Montez was confined to her cell, ate alone, and was isolated from the general prison population. She described the experience as a psychological hell. While in prison, she wrote her sister Lucy a condescending letter suggesting she see a psychologist to deal with rage toward their mother. Lucy snapped back in response, in a letter later published and so-named read, "You should know you ruined Mom's life. Every morning she wakes up devastated by what you did and where you are. Every night she goes to bed thinking the same thing. I've heard her cry because of you. It's not enough that her parents and only brother all died before she was 30, or that she was married to a violent man for 16 years and raised 4 children by herself. No, you had to ruin her final years she could be living in peace and contentment. You betrayed your family. You betrayed all your friends. There's no forgiveness for what you did. And you betrayed your nation. You helped our enemies. You are a coward. You could have stood up for your principles openly, but you hid like a coward to punish them in secret. Why did you really do what you did? Because it made you feel powerful. Yes, Anna, you wanted to feel powerful. You're no altruist. It wasn't the greater good you were concerned for. It was yourself. The CIA concluded in a psychological profile of Montez that her difficult childhood shaped her worldview and made her more susceptible to recruitment. Ana Belén Montez's childhood experiences, family relationships, and arrested psychological development contributed to her ideological and moral development and increased her vulnerability to recruitment by a foreign intelligence service. Ana Montez walked free on January 8, 2023, after serving over 21 years with credit for good behavior. She currently lives in Puerto Rico. Ana Montez fooled U.S. intelligence for nearly 2 decades, and the only way investigators finally uncovered her secret was through methodical, logical thinking. That's exactly the kind of thinking you'll build with Brilliant. Brilliant is the app I personally use to become a sharper thinker through hands-on interactive lessons in logic, data, math, programming, and AI. I like taking just 10 to 15 minutes a day to train my brain through their newly updated logic courses. Brilliant's algebra and calculus courses are also super popular. You'll start at the level you're most comfortable with and build your way up through interactive challenges that make learning actually fun. There's something for everyone, no matter your interest. You can learn how to program and start building programs on day 1 with Python. And the best part is you can try Brilliant completely free. Just visit brilliant.org/newsthink or scan the QR code on your screen. That's brilliant.org/newsthink. The link is in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription, giving you unlimited access to Brilliant's thousands of lessons. Thanks for watching. For Newsthink, I'm Cindy Paul.
This is all we have. Gold is useless to me. Take it.
In June 1984, a 29-year-old U.S. Navy intelligence analyst sat down for lunch at the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C., across from an Israeli Air Force colonel. Jonathan Pollard was giddy. This was his first contact with Israeli intelligence. Over the next 18 months, Pollard smuggled more than 1 million pages of classified material, stuffing them into briefcases and suitcases, delivering them to his Israeli handlers in broad daylight. No one in American history had ever stolen so much so fast. Pollard thought he was untouchable, but he was disastrously wrong. This is the story of how a brazen Stanford grad betrayed his country and how he finally got caught. As a teenager, Pollard's loyalty to Israel ran deep. His father, Dr. Morris Pollard, was a renowned microbiologist who often took the family on trips overseas. On one of them, they visited the Dachau concentration camp in Germany, an experience that intensified Jonathan's identification with the Jewish people and the Israeli cause. At Stanford, he began telling classmates he was a Mossad agent, a complete complete fabrication, one of many lies he'd go on to tell. But when it came to his drug use, he told the truth. He admitted to smoking marijuana about 600 times, enough for the CIA to reject him from its graduate fellowship program. And yet, in 1979, he was hired as an intelligence analyst for the Navy Field Operational Intelligence Office in Maryland, part of the Naval Intelligence Support Center, the central hub of Navy intelligence at the time. When the Navy requested a background check, the CIA, citing privacy laws, failed to disclose that Pollard had been rejected from their own fellowship program. The red flags kept piling up. As recounted in Capturing Jonathan Pollard by former Special Agent Ronald J. Olive, who led the investigation into the case, Pollard began telling supervisors he had contacts with South African intelligence. Relations with South Africa were strained due to apartheid. He claimed his father had once been the CIA station chief at the U.S. Embassy in South Africa. That was a total lie. Still, the man who hired him, Rear Admiral Thomas A. Brett, believed Pollard wasn't a threat and kept him on. It wasn't until he made a scene at a naval party, rambling to the Director of Naval Intelligence, Rear Admiral Sumner Shapiro, that Shapiro flagged him as unstable and called for his top security clearance to be revoked. To test their suspicions, the Navy staged a ruse, telling Pollard he was being considered as a double agent, which required taking a polygraph. As Ronald J. Olive describes in his book, Pollard acted bizarrely during the polygraph exam. He began shouting and shaking and making gagging sounds as if he were about to vomit. Pollard repeatedly staggered into the bathroom, although he may have had an upset stomach owing to stress. Addison, the agent administering the test, believed that he was faking his sickness. A clinical psychologist who evaluated Pollard concluded that he should not be placed in an operational role and his security clearance should be suspended. He lost his top secret clearance, yet the Navy didn't fire him. According to an internal investigation, the decision to allow Pollard continued access to secret material was based on the fact that while there were serious misgivings about his judgment, it was not clear that he represented a security risk of sufficient degree to warrant termination of all his access to classified information, which for all practical purposes would mean his termination. By September 1980, Pollard's one-year probation had ended, and civil service protections kicked in, making it more difficult to fire him. Pollard fought to get his security clearance back, filing a formal grievance against his commanding officer. And then things started to go his way. In his quarterly performance review, his commanding officer, Captain Chauncey Hoffman, wrote, "Pollard applied himself with great dedication. He routinely works a 10-hour day and at times on weekends." In January 1982, Pollard's top secret clearance was reinstated. A new opportunity soon emerged that gave him a chance to start spying for Israel. In 1983, terrorist bombings in Beirut killed over 300 people, including 241 U.S. service members. In response, the Navy set up a new intelligence hub, the Anti-Terrorist Alert Center. Its mission was to link America's top intelligence commands, the CIA, DIA, NSA, FBI, and more, so they could share threats instantly and prevent a future attack. In May 1984, Jonathan Pollard landed a temporary post there, reviewing classified reports and drafting summaries. By October, he applied for a permanent analyst job. The review board never saw his history of erratic behavior, drug use, mental health issues, or his disastrous polygraph. None of it was in his file. He got the job as an analyst for the Americas, with access to top secret and sensitive compartmented information. In other words, Pollard now had the keys to some of America's most closely guarded secrets, and he knew exactly which country he wanted to pass secrets to. As a teenager, he had dreamed of immigrating to Israel, but his parents disapproved. Years later, his girlfriend Anne didn't want to move either, so spying for Israel was his way of helping from afar. He justified his actions this way. "I watched the threats to Israel's existence grow, and gradually came to the conclusion that I had to do something." In June 1984, Jonathan Pollard met at the Hilton Hotel with Israeli Air Force Colonel Aviam Sella. Pollard had been introduced to Sella through a son of a friend of his father's, a wealthy stockbroker who was impressed by Pollard's intellect and passion for Israel. Pollard and Sella devised a plan to stay in contact using nearby payphones. Sella assigned each payphone a Hebrew letter. Whenever he needed to meet, he'd call Pollard at his home and say the Hebrew letter to direct Pollard to the correct payphone. At their second meeting, also at the Hilton, Pollard arrived with a briefcase filled with highly classified intelligence, including a top-secret study on Saudi Arabian ground forces and satellite images from Israel's 1981 bombing of Iraq's nuclear reactor taken by U.S. reconnaissance satellites. These images were marked top secret because they revealed sensitive satellite positioning data. Pollard began making deliveries every 2 weeks to the Potomac, Maryland home belonging to the Israeli Embassy's scientific attaché, Ilan Ravi, where the documents were photocopied upstairs. When he and his girlfriend Anne flew to Paris to meet Rafi Eitan, the head of Laken, Israel's scientific intelligence agency, Eitan told him, "You're one of us." Pollard was given a new Israeli identity, Danny Cohen, the name chosen in honor of Eli Cohen, the famed Israeli spy. I produced a video on him linked in the description. The Israelis agreed to pay Pollard $2,500 a month. It wasn't a huge sum to avoid suspicion, but it was enough for him and Anne to indulge in food, drinks, and drugs. Back in the U.S., the operation then moved to the D.C. apartment of Irit Erb, a secretary of the Israeli embassy. Every Friday, Pollard would check out highly classified files and drop them off at Irit Erb's apartment, where she'd photocopy the documents over the weekend. Pollard would return to pick up the documents by Sunday and take them back to the office on Monday. The volume of classified material became so massive that the Israelis eventually bought an apartment in the same building to be used solely for copying. The Israelis were counting on him for the long haul. When Pollard traveled to Israel for the first time under the alias Danny Cohen in the summer of 1985, spymaster Rafi Eitan laid out a 10-year plan of funneling $30,000 a year into a Swiss bank account held in trust under his alias. The idea of spying for another decade rattled Pollard, especially as the U.S. was rounding up spies in 1985. When he expressed his fears, his new handler, Yosef Yager, a scientific attaché of the Israeli consulate in New York, told him bluntly, as described in Olive's book, "You're obviously not ready for this." But that only made Pollard more determined, and his intelligence had deadly consequences. In October 1985, Israel bombed the Palestine Liberation Organization's headquarters in Tunisia using U.S. satellite imagery Pollard had passed along. At the time, the U.S. was forging a new diplomatic relationship with Tunisia. Tunisia expelled the visiting American delegation, accusing the U.S. of secretly aiding its closest ally in the Middle East. Across the Arab world, American credibility crumbled. It was around this time that a coworker became suspicious when he saw Pollard with a sealed envelope marked top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. Pollard claimed he had accidentally checked out the wrong documents and was on his way to destroy them. When an analyst is finished with top secret material, they're usually destroyed rather than stored, with a second person present as a witness. But later, that same colleague saw Anne pick up Pollard from work with the exact same envelope in his hands and drive away. The coworker confided in his wife, who encouraged him to report the incident to his supervisor, Commander Jerry Agee. That Saturday at 6 a.m., Agee went into Pollard's office cubicle where he was shocked to see his desk overflowing with reports on Soviet missile systems and the Middle East, regions he wasn't assigned to. When he requested a 6-month audit of every document Pollard had signed out, he discovered that Pollard picked up documents on Fridays, suggesting he was sneaking material out before the weekend. Agee hesitated. If his suspicions were wrong, it could end his career. He shared his concerns with Lonnie McCullough, Assistant Director of Counterintelligence at the Naval Investigative Service, who agreed that this couldn't be ignored. While the FBI was reluctant to launch a full investigation and dragged its feet, the Naval Investigative Service was eager to move quickly. NIS agents installed surveillance cameras disguised as part of an electrical rewire around Pollard's cubicle. Pollard was caught on hidden camera stuffing an estimated 3,000 pages of classified material into a briefcase in 3 minutes. But no one was watching the feed during those crucial minutes, and the footage wasn't reviewed until months later. When NIS agent Lisa Redmond sat down to interview Pollard, he claimed he was dropping documents off to colleagues. He refused to allow a search of his apartment, saying there might be marijuana inside. His wife used it, he explained, to ease stomach pain. During the interview, he asked to make 2 phone calls to Anne. Both were laced with suspicious language. "Go ahead and take Chris the cactus. You know, the cactus we bought for her birthday?" He later mentioned something about not forgetting a wedding album. It was all code. Cactus meant Pollard was in trouble. Wedding album was a reminder of the classified documents on China hidden inside their photo album. Anne understood the message. She crammed the documents into a suitcase that weighed over 70 pounds, then handed it off to her next-door neighbors, Babak and Christine Esfandiari, for safekeeping, explaining her husband was in trouble. But handing it to her neighbors was the worst thing she could have done. Christine Esfandiari's father happened to be a U.S. Navy officer. When his daughter mentioned the strange suitcase stuffed with classified documents, he immediately called the Naval Investigative Service. Agents seized the suitcase and found it packed with classified FBI reports, as well as Anne's fingerprints. When Pollard later agreed to an apartment search, believing Anne had disposed of the evidence, agents discovered about a dozen highly classified documents hidden under the bed and in a closet. When Special Agent Ronald J. Olive, who was leading the investigation, asked Pollard to take a polygraph, he gave a wild answer. "Ron, I don't mind taking a polygraph if they only ask me about the Soviet Union or the Soviet bloc countries." Pollard eventually confessed to stealing classified documents, but claimed he had passed the information to Kurt Lobeck, a freelance war correspondent covering Afghanistan for CBS. He had flashed classified CIA reports in front of Lobeck, but Lobeck repeatedly refused to work with him. Investigators doubted Pollard's story, but they still didn't know who he was really working for. That changed when he made a mad dash for the Israeli embassy in Washington. Out of desperation, he, Anne, and their cat headed for the embassy, with FBI agents trailing them. Pollard hoped his Israeli handler would provide an escape plan. None came. Instead of welcoming them inside, a guard at the embassy told them to leave, apparently unnerved by the FBI presence. Pollard was arrested outside the gates. FBI agents drove Anne and their cat home. Jonathan Pollard was extremely cocky during his interrogation. As Agent Olive explains in his book, Pollard talked down to him as if he were in control of the situation. "Now, don't be stupid. Don't stop asking questions just because I won't answer a certain question. You just move on to the next question." He finally admitted to passing documents to Israel, but showed no remorse. Olive observed,
Have an order? Have an order? Yes? Seems like a good deal. Hello. All right, your order is registered.
It was as if he were saying, I certainly fooled.
What is it? This is all as expected. We need. Yes. The breach you encounter. I've read this. If you find more breach rem. Yes. I serve.
Welcome. I know little, but